The torpedo paradox. The problem that CIG is currently facing. It's a multifaceted problem. It's like a Rubik's Cube where as soon as you start to solve it, someone comes in and just changes the colors of all the different facings on your Rubik's Cube, and you have to start all over again. That's kind of what this problem is. So let's take an Idris for an example. We'll use an Idris for this example. An Idris, we don't know what the maximum speed on that Idris is going to be, and that is something that could be balanced and adjusted multiple times while the game is being brought to life. And we still don't have an Idris in game that players can fly to really kind of test these things. But we can kind of look at how the game behaves, and we can extrapolate some of the problems that CIG is going to face with this said Idris. Now, we know that an Idris can land on, we'll say, certain planets and moons. CIG has shown us this before. Whether this remains in the game is debatable. But one thing that we do know is that Star Citizen is a very big game with a lot of distances that need to be traversed. Some of which you can quantum, some of which you can't. So you need a ship that can move at a certain rate of speed. Now, 800 meters a second is probably a little bit over the top. 500 meters a second, I don't think is unreasonable to expect. And I'm talking about full blown, cranking the throttle all the way up beyond SCM speed. That is not entirely unreasonable to expect. Now, moving along at about 500 or so meters a second is going to give a capital ship a reasonable defense against torpedoes, or at least a reasonable window of time to defend themselves against torpedoes, because those torpedoes are going to have to chase that capital ship to a certain degree. This isn't like back in World War II, a sub underneath the water could see a ship moving and go, okay, it's moving at this speed, it's this far away, it's going at this angle, so if I fire a torpedo at this angle, they'll meet at this point in space and time, and boom. No, torpedoes are going to track in on the capital ship, and they're going to chase after them because they're locking onto them. And as they're chasing them, if that ship is moving at that 500 meters a second, then the gunners are going to have enough time to reasonable amount of time to track in on that torpedo as it's following them and try to shoot it down, right? But we kind of enter into a bit of a problem because once again, we're thinking of this Idris. Let's say this Idris has, 3 fighters aboard that are defending it. Those fighters, to try and keep up with that Idris, are going to cash in pretty much all of their maneuverability to stay with that Idris, to protect that Idris. So they are going to be in a position where they're very difficult to use in a situation like that. So what we're kind of wandering into is a space where the faster that ship goes, the fighters that come with it become less and less viable. I mean, if you think about 2 Idrises tangling with each other, if they're moving along at that speed at around 500 meters a second, all those fighters are pretty much going to be hanging in space for all the guns that are on those Idrises. And not only that, missiles that are fired from those Idrises are not going to have nearly as difficult a time tracking down those fighters when they're forced to move at 500 meters a second to kind of keep up with those capital ships. It's going to be a very, very difficult problem for those fighters, but at the same time, you can't really slow that Idris down too much, because if you do, then a ship like this, the Retaliator, becomes far too easy to use against an Idris. Now, one pilot in a Retaliator, not that much of a threat, you could argue, but ships like the Retaliator, the Eclipse, and the Harbinger are not that difficult to afford in game with credits right now. And in the future, as more careers and more game systems come online, you can easily see that they are not going to be out of reach for a lot of players. And so you could very easily get into a situation where every time an Idris comes out, it's getting swamped by multiple torpedo bombers coming at it from every direction. So having that ship be too slow makes it too easy of a target for, kind of like a concentrated or coordinated, rather, torpedo attack from multiple directions. However, on the opposite end of things, if that ship is too fast, then the fighters that are supposed to be along to defend it aren't viable anymore, because as the faster you travel in Newtonian physics, the faster you travel, the less maneuverable you become, and the fighter's main defense is its maneuverability. So we're kind of into this problem where you have these two competing influences, whether it's these ships with their dedicated anti-capital torpedoes potentially being not viable against capital ships, or you have the problem of the fighters that come with the capital ship or that can be carried upon the capital ship no longer being a viable source of defense for that capital ship. You see, it's like you got these two things trying to push together, and the capital ships are kind of stuck in the middle, and it just becomes almost like this unsolvable problem. Like one side or the other is going to kind of dropped on its ass. I don't really see how CIG can find a comfortable medium, because for anti-capital torpedoes to be anti-capital torpedoes, they have to be able to hit a capital ship. And if the ship is too fast, they may take too long to get there. They may run out of fuel, or they may get shot down, in which case they're just totally not viable. At the same time, if a capital ship isn't slow enough, yeah, the torpedoes work and the fighters can stay with it, but the torpedoes are too easy. It's too easy to overwhelm that capital ship with torpedoes, right? So it's just this bizarre problem, and it almost feels like you have these like three classes of ships between light, medium, and capital, that almost feel like they should exist exclusively in their own games, but they've been kind of merged together, and I just don't see how in the Newtonian physics world how they can play nice with each other and be competitive and be viable against one another. It seems that in a weird way, it feels like the medium ships and the fighters are going to kind of win out on this one, which is kind of why I don't know. I like, as I've said before, there is still a Nautilus in my hangar, but I don't know. Like, I feel that even though there's a lot of money that's been kind of socketed into capitals by, the community, and there's, every time a capital ship comes up for sale, whether it's the Javelin, the Idris, the Kraken, whatever, people just go, gotta get it. Gotta get out there, gotta get it. It's the big boy, I gotta have it. I almost feel that simply because they are the smallest in terms of population, in terms of the amount of ships that are in the universe, like they're the ones that are gonna kind of get, kind of knocked down. You know what I mean? I feel like they're the least likely to kind of come out of this in a very strong position. And it makes me wonder what CIG is going to do with this. It just seems like such a difficult problem to solve. I mean, obviously you can kind of see where I've kind of put my money, right? But at the same time, I do still own that Nautilus, and I do look at ships like the Polaris, and I think, the Polaris, if it's fast enough, could be its own source of safety. But at the same time, the Class 10 torpedoes that the Polaris fires, if capital ships are too fast, then that main source of armament on the Polaris is, what it's supposed to be shooting at is going to it's going to be too easy to evade them. So, it could carry 30 torpedoes, it could carry 15. It wouldn't matter if they can't hit anything, right? So we're in a weird problem. Now, just beyond the defensive end of things, one of the main driving factors as to why capital ships need to move as quickly as they do is that in order to traverse the immense distances of the Star Citizen universe, and I'm not just talking about quantum, but like even here in a situation where, let's say I'm out in this asteroid belt and someone, like, let's say I'm in an Idris and someone is over at another point in this asteroid belt 200, 300 kilometers away, and they need that Idris to be there at this moment. Be there in a reasonable amount of time, I need to be able to kind of push that Idris's speed up beyond normal SCM speeds to get there in a reasonable amount of time. That's when we have this kind of realistically laid out universe, or even if you have a mission that's at a designated location where there's not a quantum beacon, you need to be able to get there in a reasonable amount of time, especially in an Idris. And while 200 kilometers at 500 meters a second might sound a little bit unreasonable, it's not all that terrible. But you could make it to the point where larger ships like that could, effectively pick a location and just quantum to it. Then maybe they have the sensors that you need to be able to make that without having a quantum beacon or something like that to quantum to. You could make that argument, and you could dial the speed down on the capitals. But the more you dial that speed down, the more you kind of line them up to become easy pickings for torpedo bombers, or even potentially for fighters if the turrets are so easily evaded, or if their speed is kept down below the 100 meters a second range, where a fighter can still easily circle strafe and maneuver. So you see, it's like, even when you kind of try to look for a solution, there's like 2 or 3 counter arguments. It's like, nah, that doesn't really seem to work. And it just seems like the needs of these different kind of groupings of ships in the kind of context of a Newtonian physics universe, they don't seem to kind of work together. They don't seem to mesh. And it almost feels like you're playing ships from 3 different games that have now been kind of forced to play together. Now, Star Citizen from the beginning was built as a Newtonian physics game, so it's not like I think you can kind of come in and just say, well, let's try out Star Wars, because most people would just not accept that. I would say that most of the community would be adamantly against it, but when I look at this, I'm not advocating for that solution. I'm just saying that right now, when I look at this, as just thinking about it, it just seems like an unsolvable problem. It just seems like we have these competing interests, and ultimately, if someone's going to lose, I almost feel like it's going to be the capital ships, because they're the least populated segment of the community. They have the smallest voting block, so to speak. So it's going to be weird. It's going to be really, really weird to see how this ball bounces, because either way, someone, I feel, is in this equation, someone's going to come out the loser. So I'm not sure if it's going to be the torpedo bombers. I'm not sure if it's going to be the fighters. I'm not sure if it's going to be the capitals. But I do feel that there's kind of a big shakeup coming down the pipe with all of this stuff. I'm just not sure where CIG is going to kind of, plant their flag and say, this is the hill that we are going to defend. This is the way it's going to be. I'm just really not sure. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. But yeah, to me, when I think about this is just like the unsolvable paradox.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.